Hello, my name is Stan Prokopenko. Welcome to Proko. I have Marshall Vandruff here with me to do critiques of the joints lesson. We're going to have Marshall here just for this one, and then for the other bones of the torso, I'm going to do it on my own. I just thought it'd be great to have Marshall here for this lesson because he did the demonstrations for it. If you haven't seen his demos and the original joints lesson, you can find it in this link or also in the description below. So thank you for coming, Marshall.
I'm glad to be here.
Always good to have you.
All right.
You want to go ahead and just jump right into the critiques?
Yes, let's jump right into the critiques.
All right.
This is Gabriella. Is
Yes,
that right?
This is Gabriella. And
Gabriella, you are a victim of brushes, Photoshop brushes, that make marks that seem like they're out of your control. And until you're able to put something down that is a bit more precise and not so scruffy like that, and go from point to point and get some control of these, this is going to be too difficult to do. I think you just are off right from the beginning that if Photoshop brushes are new to you, you would be better off just doing this with pencil on bond paper. Partly because pencil on bond paper is probably something you've used ever since the time you were small, and so you're familiar with it. And when you're using brushes in Photoshop and thick and thin and control with a Wacom tablet or a Cintiq or whatever else you're using is such a formidable gauntlet to get through so that you're competent with it, that's my first thing for you, is switch media or practice just doing lines where you're in Photoshop and you're working on doing parallel lines and working on doing ellipses, even with this ellipse over here. When you do an ellipse that is more like a fish because you did it like that, that's something that can create trouble. And when you don't get it exactly right, you can either erase and finesse it a little bit. But this is, the issues of form are hard to critique in this because it's too hard to see them. I mean, even just this area in here, right here, that's got to be brought up to a level where you've got control of the lines and then turned into the boxes and cylinders and wedges and other things.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so she's just drawing two-dimensional shapes, contours of the shapes rather than thinking of form, right?
Yeah, and this is really, really common with people who work on the computer. I don't know whether you did this in Photoshop, but the Photoshop is, the textures you can get with it and the line quality you can get with it can be interesting and useful, but they are such a separate discipline from learning how to draw simplified forms that I'd say dump that, work with something you're familiar with, and that way you can focus on one thing at a time. Chris Ogilvie.
Ogilvie. Do you know that guy?
No, I don't, but I just figured that Ogilvie is a name that rolls off the tongue beautifully. Chris Ogilvie.
I just have a comment on it, and it's a good one, that I like how he went through and identified each joint.
Yeah.
Rather than copying your demonstrations.
Yes.
Just line by line, he actually tried to learn, okay, what joint is this? What is it? What is its function?
Yeah.
So I like that about it. The drawing could use some work, and I think you're going to talk about that.
Sure.
So, cool.
I agree that Chris is conscientious. You obviously care about this. There's some of the things that are subtle. Some of the things went kind of wild. For example, this right here does not really look like an ellipse that would line up on a cylinder that would have an axis going away like that. But when I look at this one, I see something that looks as if you were thinking, as a draftsperson would be thinking, that that was the top of a form that if we turned it into its simplest possible incarnation would be a bit of a block, but it isn't a block, it's rounded, and so when you have the knowledge that that would be the block, and then you smooth out these parts up here, because see, that's not exactly an ellipse, it looks as if you are thinking that way. So there are some good things, but it does seem a bit hit and miss. Here's what we know about the humerus. That, say, the height of the scapula, roughly, that the humerus is going to be twice that height. So it should come down to about here if it were not foreshortened. But you are telling us that it is foreshortened.
A little bit, right?
Yes, you're
Just a
telling
tiny
us
bit.
that with these curves. As soon as you have two lines that go like that, and we have an ellipse going around it like that, then we've got something that tells us that this end would be closer to us if it were sliced off. But it still looks too short for a humerus. So it's not a problem with the cross contour, which does make the point. I think that the problem is that this does not overlap those epicondyles as much as it would overlap those epicondyles and cut into there like that. And as soon as you do that, now you're not just using the principle of putting a cross contour to show that it is going away from us. We're also bringing this form in front of this form. I think that will help give the illusion that this is going away from us as it goes down by some overlap as well as cross contour.
Yeah. And I think people might be confused thinking, why is this foreshortened? It's just vertical.
Yes.
But our eye level is only at one spot.
Yeah.
Everything below that is now moving away from our eye level.
That's right.
And so as you go down, you need to foreshorten those. And as you go up, you start to foreshorten those as well.
Yeah.
Um,
This is
Yeah.
quite a telephoto view, though. Telephoto view means your eye is a great distance away from it. So when something moves, I'm enough of a distance away from the camera to where if I move my hand like that, it's not going to change that much size. But if I move my whole body toward it, it does make a difference because now we're getting significantly closer to the camera. Basil?
basil.
The slaughtering of names is just a given in this. If you give us the pronunciation of your name in your description, then we can honor it. Yes, look at this. Look at what's going on with this right here. That is going into there enough to where there's no doubt that the overlap, oh gosh, this one even more so. In
Yeah.
fact, this one may be a little too much, but at least it did it.
But it's much more foreshortened.
Yes, it is.
So
it's
it
just
would
significantly
overlap
more
more.
foreshortened. That's right. So that means it is going to fall behind there. But Basil, you did this. You made it so that one form is not only, gosh, they're very nicely and cleanly delineated so that the cross contours with no shading make it clear how these things could be built, which was a lot of what this assignment was about. You're trying to get the shape of these bones and how they articulate with each other at the joints.
Yeah, I agree. This is a very good example of clearly indicating form.
Yeah.
Specifically what you said is overlapping forms on forms to show their relationships.
Yeah.
I did have one thing to say about this area in here also. Even though it's really nicely drawn, it could be improved. The first thing is this glenoid cavity in here is kind of flat. If we're going to simplify this joint into the ball and socket that it is, we need to make this socket as much of a socket as this ball is a ball. You made this ball a very nice ball, but the socket is not. It's just a plane. And so you would probably want to, indicate an ellipse and show that it's going inward in there. So it's a socket. So it's a concave. And I probably should have warmed up.
Yeah, the centipede
lines.
slide all over the place.
Yeah, but anyway, you get the point here. This is a concave plane that I'm indicating in this area. Right?
How do you do over here on the right?
That one looks better to me. It looks
It's
like
not round.
it's not. You mean it's not concave in there?
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's got that problem of coming up to a point. I don't know.
Coming up to a point. Okay, yeah. So you would round out that
Yeah,
the ellipse in here.
I would, and so would you, and so would Basil.
Yeah. However, isn't the glenoid cavity a little bit pointed on
I think
the
it is.
top?
I don't
But it
have
isn't on both ends. It's more triangular.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out when we look at it. I don't know it that
But yeah,
well.
I would simplify it to just a socket, a simple socket, since
Yeah.
this is what the section is about. Oh, another thing, Basil.
Basil, I think, I mean, Basil is the way I know it. If it's basil, forgive us, Basil.
Basil sounds cooler. It's like it's an herb. Okay. Another thing is that I feel like you did copy too much of what Marshall did in his demo. A lot of the lines you used, you took straight out of his demonstration instead of trying to construct it on your own, which is good, but maybe next time try to do it on your own first, then watch the answer video. Maybe you did that and then you're too embarrassed to show your first attempt. I don't know, but
It's a good copy.
it is a good copy, but it's a copy. So I wanted to contrast that with Ines. His lines or his forms are not as clean and not as clear. I mean, a lot of it is even just still organic, like this drawing in here. It doesn't have any three-dimensional form other than maybe this little cap that he put in here. But all of this other stuff, it's just outlines of a shape. You're not showing planes in there. But the good thing I wanted to say about his is that he is not copying Marshall's demo. He's trying to construct it on his own. He's finding his own solution. So this one here is a hinge joint, right? And he's putting a cylinder for the humerus and a thing that wraps around the cylinder. That's a basic hinge. And so he found his own solution to it.
Yes.
So even though his forms aren't as clean, I do like that he was solving the problem on his own.
I do too. There's an analogy here. If you're an actor and you get enamored with a particular actor in a particular performance in a movie, and you watch that actor and you imitate them, what you'll be doing is imitating that actor's interpretations, and you'll pick up their mannerisms, you'll pick up the way they handle themselves, and you will very likely become a clone of that actor. And the much harder thing to do is to, from the page, bring it alive so that you're bringing your own body rhythms and people that you know or impersonations or whatever that will help it, so that you interpret what happens from the words to the lines. And it's a much, 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 much more complex thing. I mean, that's why you spend years working on it, whereas learning to impersonate somebody is a shorter thing, but it doesn't go nearly as deep and it's not as useful for your own versatility. And solving these things by moving them around and figuring out how that mechanism would be in that position will keep you busy for a long time, but it'll also pay off for a longer time.
Yeah, and I feel like if you try to solve it on your own, you will understand it better because you try to do it on your own.
Yeah.
You'll remember it longer.
That's right.
It'll just stick with you more because your thought was just completely into figuring out that problem.
Figure that 70, 80, 90% of it is struggle. And if you just figure 70, 80, 90% of it is struggle, but the 10, 20, 30 that's left over where I succeed at it came through the struggle, and then you own it.
And if you're not able to figure it out, if you're really struggling, you just can't figure it out, then that's what you go to the masters for, or Marshall's answer videos.
Yeah.
Then you go and you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, that's how you solve that. And then you do it on your own again. So
The analogy
there's
of
a
the
good way.
sponge. Squeeze the sponge until it's dry, and then it's ready to take in what it's got. But when you got knowledge coming over the sponge, there is a lot about that struggle that makes learning, even though it doesn't seem like it makes it more efficient, it does make it more efficient.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you, Ines. Let's move on to NKLPZ. I'm just going to pronounce it Nick Lopez.
Nick Lopez is
Nick
Lopez.
Lopez.
Nicholas was.
Nick Lopez.
Nick Lopez.
Okay, so with Nick's, I see a lot of exploration, a
Yes.
lot of studying.
Yeah.
He's drawing these forms from different angles, just imagining other angles that he could draw from. Or actually, I think he was just using the 3D model on the premium section.
Okay.
But that's good. That's what that's
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
You know, you can take that model, rotate it, and draw it from every angle. If you're looking at it at one angle and you don't understand it, rotate it a little bit. See what's going on there. That's what that model is there for. But the main thing I really wanted to say is, this is actually another example of something good, is that he didn't just copy the reference, or he didn't just draw it in the position of the reference, but he also extended this arm to be straight. You know, in this one, it's bent, and that's the reference photo. He drew the same one, but straightened out, just to show that that hinge joint rotates like this.
Yeah.
And that also shows that he understands the forms, because if you can draw it like this from reference, can you then imagine it like this? And so if you can, then that shows that you understand how that perspective works.
Yeah.
So.
Now, this shows good process. This shows someone who's really working on problem after problem after problem. I mean, look at that, from the shoulder all the way down to the elbow to the hands, and willing to make it so that it's even a little bit sketchy and scratchy, but it's trying to find it.
Yeah. It's a little, yeah, like you said, it's a little scratchy, maybe needs to be cleaned up, but I don't want people to think that they have to clean up their homework before they post it on the group.
Yeah.
It's nice if your lines are clean, but I'd rather see these works in progress than nothing at all. If you're too embarrassed to show it because it's messy, that's also not good.
Yeah.
But I mean, you should just try to keep your lines clean even during the exploration stage. If they're too scratchy, you're just confusing yourself. So, but there is a little bit of messiness that is fine, and sometimes it's actually good.
Yeah.
I actually like sometimes people's sketchbooks that are got a little bit of that messiness.
I plead guilty to messiness.
But you make
Okay.
it work.
Well, by the time it's finished, by the time it gets dressed up. Okay, this is Miguel.
Miguel. Yes. The elbow joints in yours, this one and this one. You're simplifying the forms into simple, primitive geometric shapes. But I think you can simplify them in a different way that will show the function of a joint better. You've simplified, let's go to this one on the left. You showed this wrench shape on the humerus. But that wrench shape really doesn't provide any function to the humerus. That's not what it does. It doesn't hold anything on the outsides. The humerus is really there for the ulna to rotate, to grab onto and rotate around it like a hinge. And so it would be much, I guess much better to simplify that bottom of the humerus as a cylinder, just as a shape that the ulna can rotate around. So instead of this, you would just draw a cylinder, and then the ulna wrapping around it. I'm not going to go all the way into it because Marshall already did that demonstration, but basically it grabs on around it.
Yeah, the ulna is more of a wrench than the epicondyles. I mean, it's gripping up
Yes.
here like a wrench on there that's coming toward you, as opposed to seeing one that's in full profile.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you did show these two forms, right? This ball and this little, I don't know what shape that is, bow tie shape. And that's the part of the humerus that the ulna grabs onto, and that's the more important part to show the function. But you put a lot of emphasis on this wrench. Same thing in here on this side. You showed this shape, which really doesn't do anything. And then you have this this cylinder, really small in here. That's the important one. That's the part that the ulna grabs. And then also, I would say maybe instead of putting a cylinder all the way through, do something in this area that shows that the radius and the ulna have a joint between them. It's a pivot joint. So if we were looking at it from the top, this would be the ulna, and then you have the radius, kind of like that. Put a little thing in there to show that this locks in there,
Nice.
and it'll spin inside of that notch.
Hey, do you know what this bow tie shape is? Do you know technically what that bow tie shape is? I mean,
What technically?
Yeah,
What do you mean?
what they call that shape?
Oh,
It's a word you may have never heard before. This is just me
just
showing
one
up.
side of it, or if you put two of them together?
Oh, it's just
That-
one. What
One
is
side of that?
technically what is a cone shape called, or a truncated cone shape? You know,
A cone with thing
It's a-
cut off?
it's a frustum.
I've never heard of that word.
I'd never heard of it either. It might even be a frustrum, but I think it's a frustum, F-R-U-S-T-U, and we'll look it up on Wikipedia and see if I'm wrong.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah.
I'll just call it a cone with the top cut off.
I just wanted to throw in some trivia so I could
Nice.
look smart.
Okay.
Miguel, I have words for you. You did this with pen and ink, I think. It might have been done in pencil that when you scan it into Photoshop, you heighten the contrast and it looks like pen and ink. But it looks like a ballpoint pen or it may be a rollerball pen. And you also included shading. Now, I have a couple thoughts. One is, if you work with pencil, you give yourself more forgiveness to figure things out as you go. There's an advantage to working in pen in that when you put it down and you are committed to that line and there is no going back, that can be a good exercise, but it is not this exercise. This exercise is trying to find the form. And the shading has gotten in the way. This is a great example of the shading getting in the way in that I'm not sure how things are shaped because you've got so many cross contour lines in there that they become shade lines. And even on something like this one, what I would rather see is the information that is going to help me know how to shade this. For example, if this is a cylindrical cross section, and we put a cross contour like that around there. Do you see how a cross contour like that, if we're going to make the light come from this direction, could perhaps, let's do it actually from that direction, it's going to hit here and here and here, and the core shadow is going to happen right where that curve makes its most radical curve away. Whereas if I were to have a cross contour that was shaped like that, do you see how that same light coming that direction is going to be softly changing there? If we have two blobs here that are pretty much the same shape, but we say that this one has a cross contour on it like this, and this one has a cross contour on it like this, look at the difference in how the shading is going to go. This one's going to have its core shadow right along there, and most of it will be in light. Whereas this one could have its core shadow way up here, and we'll have a great big shadow area here. And we're going to have completely different shading with the same shape. But the way we knew how to shade it was that we knew that this cross contour will be shaped a certain way, and it might be shaped like that, as you've got it here, where you've got a very strong plane break. So the point of all of this is, leave out shading, and then you will feel lost. How do I show how to make it shaped a certain way? Rely on cross contours, and it will be harder work than shading, but if you go through that hard work, then you'll have some kind of line to tell you that if the angle of the light were coming this way, here's where it would change. And you also wouldn't jump the light. Jumping the light means that you've got the light coming from this way here, and then for whatever reason, you've got the light coming from this way here. And you can do that. Jumping the light can be useful because you don't have to follow the rules of where light's coming from. But when you're jumping the light, you want to be aware of it because it does tend to pop out that lighting's not consistent with the rest of the picture. Now, case in point, Mohammed has done this with no shading, and yet look how clear things are.
Yeah.
In fact, right here, I can tell whether it's this way on a radius or not, and actually it is this way on a radius, but he has stated confidently that that is the point where the light wouldn't be able to get past that part there, and it's round, so it wouldn't be exactly a hard plane break. Here it's quite soft, so it's going to be a pretty gradual plane break, but we'll know that all of this area here is going to generally receive light. And we've done, gosh, look at what he's done here. This is better than my demo in the previous one with that had the shading in it. That's all an abrupt plane break, and here the core shadow would soften. Maybe a little hard to see because it's so small on here, but you get the idea. Things are changing form, and when they change form, light will fall on them differently. Mohammed, good job in that you're just paying so much attention to this. Precision, pronouncing every word clearly.
Yeah. The only thing I didn't really like about this one, or I think could just be a little bit more clear, is this wrist right here. It doesn't look like he's showing the side plane, bottom plane as clearly as he does with all of his other forms. So I'm not sure if you're trying to indicate like an egg shape in there or a box. Or I'm really just not sure. I would put a box in there. So it would be, I guess we're seeing the bottom plane. And so you would show this wrist like so. Very foreshortened. And show that maybe this is a rounded one. If you want to, if you don't want it to be a perfect box, you can round off the corner. But basically, it just needs to have a better indication of what the orientation of that form is.
I want to mention something though. I totally agree. That is a weird looking wrist. But at least you were willing to put yourself on the line with clear light. I mean, you can mispronounce a syllable, but if you're clear with it instead of fudging it, then we can correct the pronunciation. And you did put lines around there, and we look at it and say, oh, that's wobbly. Okay, let's fix it. And it isn't hiding behind any kind of slushy technique.
All right, Perka. Perka has a lot of really good, clean drawings. I feel like he's cleaning them up before he posts them to the group.
Coming to the doctor with some jaundice, but you got makeup on, huh, Perka? Nice.
All I was going to say is it's a really good example of a clean, structured drawing, but you had something to say?
Yeah, I have nothing but admiration for how much care you're putting on, but was there one of the front view of the three-quarter down view of the skeleton?
It's the other page.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Perka, again, your precision and willing to make the line so there's no ambiguity of where it is great, and you have solved so many things here, and you're working on this. This is one of those things, though, where when everything is so well done, that one thing has a problem, it pops out. And this area is an area that pops out. Those ellipses and the knowledge of that form are, it looks like you got ahead of yourself, got a nice clean line, but didn't quite understand it.
Are you talking about the neck or the manubrium?
Is the neck in particular. I'm zooming in on that area because it's that neck that stands out. Now, if you can get rid of, one thing, remember that from the side, the curves of the spine are going to have this convex to the front curve for that neck, which means that it would be very unlikely that we have that curving that way.
Yeah.
Control Z and get rid of that.
Especially
Let's do it.
since it's a vertical.
Yeah.
If he's going like this, if he's bending his neck forward, then it starts to bend like that. But in a straight vertical pose, the neck curves backward.
Yeah. So if the neck column is going to be something like that, we also want to understand this as boxes at some point, because boxes are going to be the things that make us have to get really precise. And so we've got one that is barely tipped down, and by the time we get to this one, it's going to be tipped down more so that we'll see more of the top plane of it. See, this one ended up being more of a sliver of a plane up here. This one we're looking more into it. And that means that the curve of the ellipse that we round out from there is going to be more curved down there. And up here, I guess you do have that a little bit. That's a straighter line, and that looks like it's a little more curved. So you are thinking that way. But
Tiny bit, yeah.
this is just to point out that this area popped out only because you did such a good job in all the other areas that when you make one little area that where you've neglected it, it pops out.
Yeah.
Such is the price you pay for doing good work.
Good job. This is Lars. Lars, I think it's too organic. You're copying exactly what you see from the photo reference. All the little bumps and crevices on the bones, you know, the contours, all the little wiggly shapes. You're not simplifying it to cylinders, boxes, spheres. You're doing a little bit of it here in this hand, but maybe not enough. Just keep them more structured, less organic.
Yeah.
Yeah, these two on the top are the most like that.
Yeah, I agree. And what is happening here is that you're eating dessert first. You're making something that, when you show this to people who are not aware of what the exercise is, the initial punch of this is impressive. Those are nice looking pieces. A lot of that is style. It's the primary outlines that are thick. It's the secondary shading that's kind of whispered, but it still makes it look thick. Those are surface stuff. Those are things that are not helping you to really understand these forms. If you were to do this with way less class and style, but just make that humerus come up like that and twist it and see if you can make those condyles or epicondyles change position, that's going to help you a lot more. I mean, to take that humerus and bring it toward us and also make it so that this is going to spin a certain way toward us, and say that that's going to be this way and that that's coming toward us, and then start to refine these things so that they are much more specific, like everybody else has been doing. And make it look lousy, make it look, I mean, not impressive as a piece of, let's do the other way here, not impressive as a piece of style. In doing that, here's what I was going to do. I was going to go like this and do the same one in this position. But I recognized that I'd done it in this position already, and I started to spin it, and then I see that doesn't look right. If I'm going to make it in that position where I've got that other one spin over, that cylinder on the end of it is going to be a better choice like that. And you see, those aren't impressive lines, but I'm at least trying to work out some simple forms and say that I'd see more of this side if it were a block, whereas on this case I'd see more of this side if it were a block. That's the kind of thing where the work of figuring out how to tumble this stuff around, get some lumpy forms in there, start to make them more precise, and then all of this stuff can be saved for another project.
Okay. So you're suggesting draw them from different angles.
Yeah, like you've said, and keep them simpler. Look at all the detail over there on that foot, and a lot of energy put into it too.
Yeah,
it's a whole different thing though. Technique and style can be a part of your appeal of your art. It's sometimes what people buy it for. Yeah. But this is about now, Lars. This is Lars, right?
Yes.
Let me show you how you made up for it.
Ah, yes.
Because after having given you that, whoa, Lars repented and went the other way. He was going the wrong path, and he said, I'm going the wrong path. I'm going to go the other path to prove it. Good show, Lars.
So we just gave you this critique, and then you already did it.
You sensed in the future that it was going to happen this way.
Yeah. I really like this middle one of the up view,
Yeah.
or the down view of the rib cage.
Yeah, and you've got some of the style going on with the primary, that business that I said about primary thick outlines. Pen and ink artists, you really see this in the golden age of pen and ink. Winsor McCay is an example, but this is not just a golden age of pen and ink, early 20th century Art Nouveau thing. Mucha was really extreme with it. You can see it back in Da Vinci's drawings, where they would make the primary outline thicker because it makes a nice graphic design, and as soon as you cut into the form, you thin it up, and there's a nice, loud, soft dynamic change that goes on with that. And you're doing that in your form studies, and you're doing that in your stuff that has a shading in it too.
Yeah. I really like his exaggeration of this one, actually. I like this one a lot. Like,
Yeah.
this is one of my favorites from the whole thing.
Yeah.
Look at the exaggeration of the perspective he's showing here.
Yeah.
Going to a vanishing point over there, and then in here, going to a vanishing point over here. And so he's got this grid, right? And they're all going to a vanishing point. And this is now going up. Instead of just making everything parallel, he's exaggerating the converging lines.
Yeah.
And because he did that, he's actually able to show the bottom plane of this,
Mm-hmm.
which other people, they drew it the way they saw it in the reference,
Yeah.
and it didn't look like that acromion process was a top plane of a
Yeah.
shoulder. It felt like it was kind of pointing up a little
That's
bit,
right.
which the reference suggested it a little bit, but if you're to really simplify that, it would be a top plane, and this just does a great job of showing that.
And also, when it's organic, you can't tell. And when you've chiseled it up and made it blocks like that, there's no ambiguity about where that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
So, Lars, I would like to take back everything that I said to you about it, because I hadn't seen this other side of you. I do want to mention one thing, that when you have any form that goes that long, it would be nice to remind us,
Yeah.
when you've got something that long, what it's shaped like in there.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Lars, for your initial bad example and then your very good example.
We're rooting for you.
Jasa Dobrozansky.
We're guessing at pronunciation again, huh? Jaza?
Jasa Dobrozansky.
Jaza.
Somewhere from Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Maybe Ukraine? You from Ukraine? Jasa. Oh, yes. Right in here. Just simplify it to a nice socket. And instead of showing a flat plane in there, show that it is concave. Right? That socket is a socket. It's something that ball inserts into. Now the shoulder socket is not a very deep ball and socket like the hip is, but it's still concave a little bit. So showing that will help. And actually, I want to show an example by Andreas where he does that very nicely, just to show. So thank you, Andreas, for that. Back to Jazza. The other thing I wanted to talk about is right in here, this wrist. The wrist to the radius is an ellipsoid. And so when you draw those two forms, make sure that they connect as an ellipsoid. You have nice structure, could be a little bit cleaner, but it's good. You're showing this plane in here. But again, it looks like a flat plane. It doesn't look like a socket that this rounded part of the ellipsoid will fit into. Also, this part of the wrist, or the hand, would be the rounded part of the ellipsoid. And so this boxiness that you put wouldn't really work. I would do something like this. Let's say there's your hand. You drew it as a box. I would round it off like that. So showing that that is
Convex.
convex. Thank you. So this tip is the apex. It's not flat like a box. It rounds off and it can rotate inside of this concave form. Okay?
Now, I want to address something that I think that's going on here, Jaza, is that when you're trying to do a study like this, you can only concentrate on one thing at a time when something is new to you. And if this is new to you, and you're trying to get cross contours around here, and you are doing that, and conscientiously, but you can also forget, while you're working on that, to exaggerate and to figure you got a very slight curve up there on that, that glenoid cavity. So you may have been thinking, but you weren't thinking enough to where, say, hey, take a chance with this. And if you've brought it up to this level to where at least you're wrapping lines around things, trying to understand their forms, then to have one session where you're going to really take it over the top and make these things radically exaggerated. Then it can remind you that things that might be subtle, when you've exaggerated them, then you know that that's how they are. You can always make them subtle later. It's easier to whisper something when you know how to pronounce it than it is to pronounce it when you don't know how to pronounce it. So you're trying to exaggerate this and then later scale it back.
Okay, so is that it for Jazza?
That's it for Jaza.
All right. Thanks, Jazza. Andreas, I already mentioned he's got a really nice socket in here for the ball. The other thing, though, is you rotated this part of the humerus, so it doesn't really match the reference. Now, this is within the range of motion of a natural shoulder. I could rotate that inward, but that's not how it is. I don't know if you did that on purpose. You drew this going away from us. Really, it would just be...
But hey, we're encouraging him to do that,
straight
right?
across.
Right?
We are, but I just don't know if he did that on purpose or not.
I think he did it on purpose. Look at
All
those.
right.
Look at those cross contours. Look how he's got a distinct position for where that is. And actually,
Yeah.
I'm not getting it at the right angle, but yeah. I congratulate. Who is this? This is
Andreas.
Andreas.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have to say. If you did that on purpose, then really good job of rotating it. But if not, then look more closely. Right, the next person, Raphael.
Raphael.
Oh, the thing I wanted to say about Raphael's is that you are using only cylinders. You're not showing any boxed forms. You're not showing any front plane, side plane, bottom plane, top plane. You're rounding everything off. And because everything is a cylinder, there is some three-dimensionality missing from this. You know, in this humerus, I'm not really sure what's going on. You're not even showing a cross contour in there. You are the only one is in here in the connection. But where's the back plane? Where's the side plane? It would have been nice if you showed us this and this, and then maybe even just actually connect. Just make the whole thing to a box. I mean, really, the shaft would be a cylinder, but other things like that should be boxed up. The clavicle should be boxed. Some of these joints, you should show some top plane, side plane of that. Those should be boxed up. The wrist should be boxed up. So you're really comfortable with cylinders, and I think you should just expand.
Yes, I would like to add to that. In fact, at the risk of being monotonous, I've said it before, and I say it so often, you can hardly, in your training, overdo boxes, because boxes are the foundation of the other forms. So even on this humerus, that if you are thinking of that as a box and you've got a line like that and a line like that, now what you've done is down here, that line, which we will call that an X line, that is going to be the line that helps you to know where this cylinder would be lined up, because the cylinder will be running in the same direction as that. And if it were spun in any other direction, if it were tilted in another direction, you'd be able to reference it to this line, to that X line that is going to go one way or another. So boxes for training, for getting you to be able to see things, are, you can hardly overdo them. And the other thing is, as Stan mentioned, anything that is this long could use one or two reminders in there. Because you see how, if you just isolate that, what is it? It's two lines. Even one in there will help. If it's a short form, if it's something that size, you hardly need a cross contour to remind us. But as soon as you start to spread it out to where we could forget when we look at this what this thing's shaped like.
Yeah, and it could change so much from the beginning to the end.
That's right.
It's kind of good to
I
look
think,
at it in the middle as well.
I think there's two reasons that you can use a cross contour. One is you use a cross contour whenever there's a change of form. When it goes from cylindrical to boxy, or from a cylinder that's squashed one way to a cylinder squashed another way, use a cross contour and that defines it. That's why with wireframes and 3D programs you have a whole bunch of cross contours. You can see every undulation of plane change. And the second reason is what I just mentioned, is that when a form is long enough to where you might forget, that's a little reminder that we are still on a round form.
Cool. You have anything to say about his second page?
Same issues. Boxing things up is going to be the thing that will help.
Yeah, these are all cylinders.
Yeah, same thing here, Roderick. I mean, this could just use a reminder that this is a particular shape, a particular form. And this gets, I'm not sure about what's going on in there.
That's what I had to say about this one too, is that you simplified the forms. These look very simple, and I could see that there's a top plane in here, and there's a side plane in here, and you're really showing that, right? But the forms you chose to simplify into, they don't show the function of that joint, which was really the whole lesson. It was the types of joints, right? So we've got your ball and socket, your pivot, your ellipsoid, saddle, all those joints. You need to identify each joint as whatever type it is, and then simplify it to resemble that geometric shape. And I think you were looking at it, and you were just looking through observation of all the little bumps on the bone, instead of asking yourself, what is the function of it, and now how do I draw this geometric shape to have that function?
Yeah, and this is hard to do when you're faced with all sorts of little perspective problems. It is one of the most common problems in creating any work of art, is to get caught up in small things at the expense of large things. This is why composers, painting composers, work thumbnails. Thumbnail means you're going to work a small thing before you put any detail in there, and when you know that when you work a thumbnail, you're working big things because there's only room to do big things. And when you're working on the function of these joints, to try to not look at the small parts first, but to get that great big, that's a hook, that's a bar, that's a swivel. And we name these different types of joints. And when we have a name on each one, see how simply, look what you've done in the upper left here. You've done it. You've done it as diagrams, and you've tried to turn these things into the simplest things possible. Although you put a nice color in there too.
Yeah.
Let's go to the previous one. I wanted to see what Roderick did
in his first one.
Yeah. Okay. Roderick. This is Roderick. Same person. This shows an exploratory spirit. That again, I'm running into the same thing happened with Lars. I was admonishing him on something, and then he says, "Yeah, well, watch this." This is exploring around, trying to find the big things.
Yes.
Go ahead.
But that elbow is still,
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a hinge.
Yeah.
You're showing a hinge here in this side drawing, but you didn't put it in to your drawing of the reference photo.
Yeah.
So I could see you're understanding what a hinge is, but why not put it there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you are running, you are rolling, you are doing the work, but now we've got to get it more focused. And these little diagrams that you're doing on the side are actually better than what
Yes.
you're applying to the bones themselves.
Yeah.
That's a matter of, if this hand is getting out of sync with this hand, it's a matter of just working it until you start to get them into sync. You can apply those. You've got enough going on in the stuff you're doing on the side to show that it's a matter of time and continuing to work.
Yeah, I could see things are clicking. You just need to practice these a little bit more in order to get them all really connect and to fully understand all this. So, I guess the advice is just keep doing these, right?
Keep doing these and be reminding yourself, macro, big pivot, big hinge, that's what it is. How can I say it with the fewest possible lines? Well, I mean, this is a great example right here. Who is this? This is Richard Zuppa?
Yeah, Richard.
Richard Zuppa. There's several things going on in here that impressed me. One is your process. You're starting, this is all one drawing, and it looks like the preliminary drawing happened on there, and you did the thing that is valuable in training. You made light lines first so that your beginning lines aren't so heavy that you have to be committed to them. And then when you were sure of them, you darkened them in so that they dominate, but there's a little reverberation of the old lines, and you chiseled. You made it so that there are distinct plane breaks. So there's no guessing what those forms are. There's no smoothness of cylinders where you can't locate where the edge is. I was very impressed with this.
Mm-hmm. I like it too.
Was there more?
I don't think so.
Richard.
I mean, at least not in what we pulled out to show.
Okay, well, if there was, maybe you did more and we just aren't showing it. But good work. Yes.
Next one is for William Shepard, or Shefford? It would be Shepard.
Shepard.
Yes, perspective is hard. It is very hard, but it's worth it. It's worth it to study it. All that pain and suffering is worth the effort. The things I'm noticing are mainly proportional in the way you're indicating the forms.
Yeah.
One of them, this scapula is too wide, feels round. Another thing, this humor, the shaft, seems a little bit thick. Does it seem thick to you?
Yes, it does.
It does?
It's
Okay,
too thick.
good. And then finally, the main thing is the forms of the ulna and radius. You have the radius as a really thick form going all the way across, and you have the ulna as a very thin form running all the way across. Really, the ulna starts out thick at the top, thin at the bottom. The radius will be thin at the top, thick at the bottom.
Yeah.
Right? They're
Counterchanged.
yeah, they kind of fit together like that, so that the ulna fits with the humerus. Remember, with that hinge joint, right? This will wrap around this. I'm just drawing a very flat diagram here. So this ulna connects to this with a hinge. And then the radius will connect to the wrist with an ellipsoid. And then these two will connect with a pivot. And then these two will connect with a pivot. So I think understanding all of these joints in the way the ulna, the radius, the humerus, and the hand, how they connect is very important, and being able to draw all those joints as having that function. I keep repeating the same thing. Draw the form to have the function.
Yeah, but it's because the same things come up. I mean, when you're trying to master any skill, we make the same mistakes over. You can categorize. There'll be 3 or 4 things that can go wrong when somebody tries to do that, and so there's this tendency to repeat the same advice over and over. This is William.
Yes.
William is doing something, though, that you complimented some students for earlier. He is making up his own forms. I mean, look at that elbow. Look what he's doing. And
He is.
he's saying perspective is hard, which of course it is, but look what you've done. You have given us a sense that this is a plane that is a separate plane from this one, and that this is a top plane here that then changes its position. And that right there, just this is enough to say you've got a basic understanding that things can be facing different directions when in fact this whole thing is a white flat surface and you're giving an illusion. So perspective is hard, but it's also fun. You're making an illusion.
Yeah. I think depends on your personality.
Well,
It's fun
yeah,
on that.
I suppose some people may not get off on perspective.
I used to think it was really boring and not enjoyable at all. But I think maybe it was because it was so hard for me
Yeah,
in the beginning. It was like, I don't understand at all.
I
This is
understand.
just- and then once you start getting a grasp of it, then it becomes really fun.
Yeah, it's like a magic trick in a way.
Yeah. You can make lines that create three-dimensional shapes. Dragonesque Adrian.
Dragonescu
Dragonescu.
Adrian. What an awesome name. Your parents named you Dragonescu?
I doubt it.
This is so rare these days.
Let's see here. I like it, except what is going on here and here? Are we looking through? Oh, okay. No, this is
I think I
correct.
see.
This is correct. But this side, this
I think I see what's going on.
this
think I
radius
understand,
is
yeah.
not connecting to this ulna. Remember that they should connect with a pivot, but they're not touching.
Yeah.
You have the radius above the ulna, and they're just, it wouldn't be able to rotate around it.
Good observation. I mean, now that you mention it, yeah, I didn't even notice it at first. I was just looking at the forms and didn't see that anatomically that was separated.
Yeah.
There's something else to watch out for here. Who is this? This Dragonescu?
Yes.
It has to do with what people call atmospheric perspective. That when you have two things like that, you can't tell which one is closer. If you want to make one look closer, can we make the way smaller eraser?
Oh yeah.
Make a real
Yeah,
small
go ahead.
point for the eraser. Yeah, that's good. Oh, no, there we go. Yeah, like that. When you do this, you thin out the one behind, then that smaller one's going to look as if it's closer. Go ahead and reverse that, or do Command Z or Control Z until we get those lines back. I could have done it the opposite. We could have done it so that the big ball was closer to the other one. And that just makes it so that you don't get confused as far as what's in front. And down here, we've got these great big heavy marks that make it look like one thing is closer to us when I couldn't tell where the radius
Yeah.
was. I thought it was behind something.
Yeah, it looks like you made the ulna darker.
Yeah.
It's just clarity in your drawings, even when you're sketching, is just a good habit to create.
Yeah.
You know, if you're ghosting something in behind something else, make it lighter. It'll just be more clear and just good habits. Tomas.
Tomas. We're assuming it's Tomas and not Thomas,
Yes.
or not Thomas.
Well, doesn't he have a little? Yeah, he has a
Yeah.
little.
Okay, then it's Tomas.
What is that thing called?
Yeah.
A little tail
Yeah. One of those
on the A.
That little thing.
Tomas.
Yeah.
Tomas. Pretty watercolors, but let's focus on the perspective of these forms. This cylinder needs some work, especially in the caps. The angle of this ellipse, you're making it vertical. And I'm assuming you are just doing that because you think ellipses should be either vertical or horizontal. I used to think that for a very long time.
Yeah.
I would say, oh, this is the cap of a cylinder, and I would just make it either horizontal or vertical, whichever's closer to the angle of the form.
I did too.
But that's not how it works. drawing cars is when I learned it.
Yeah.
On wheels, that the ellipse of the wheel, I would always make them vertical. All the wheels would just vertical wheels. But then I learned that it needs to be perpendicular to the axis between the wheels.
Sure.
So, let's say that this is a car, this is one side of the wheel, and then you got the wheel on the other side of the car. And then you would have, 2 more wheels, and there you have a car. The way you find the angle of these ellipses is, let's say this is the axis between the 2 wheels. Perpendicular to that will be the angle of the ellipse.
Well explained and well drawn. Well, now you're starting to get...
I'm messing it up.
Yeah, well, yeah, I got the general placement, though. Is
But there you go. And then cap that off with the same angle on that ellipse. And there you go. Now you have a cylinder in correct wobbly perspective.
Yeah, but that idea, that was, I was the same way, and it was cars that I first got. I got it from Ernest Watson's book, and I was sitting at a bus stop and saw cars going. You could see the ellipses changing when I read it in the book, and it changed everything. That is, that was well explained too.
Oh,
You just
thank you.
don't run them, don't do them just vertical and horizontal. Find the axle.
The axle. I kept saying axle.
Yeah, but the axle is when it's right angles. When your whole ellipse is placed at right angles to the axle, then you've got it.
Yeah.
At least you got the placement. You don't necessarily have the angle. That might be a more open ellipse, right? It
Yeah,
might be,
it's-
it might be rounder.
Yeah. Let's just pretend it's squishy.
We will. Okay, is my turn?
Yes. Go ahead.
There are some issues here, and they are things like what Stan has mentioned. And there are also other things like putting ellipses around here that doing that dotted line behind them gives that atmospheric perspective that can tell they're on the other side. But those ellipses need work as ellipses. Ellipses are not fish. They don't come to a corner. They are always going to be rounded. Sorry,
Let's give you another chance.
Yeah, give me another chance. We'll see. I'll try making it a little slower. There,
there you go.
Yeah. They are always going. There's never a point where there would come a corner,
Yeah.
and they have to have a particular ratio of curve that you spend time memorizing, and you've got that going on a few times. Now it's solvable. You can get that by studying ellipses, but I think what happens here that I think is a bigger problem is your process. You have taken the time to put watercolor in here. And I remember when I was a student, I did a portrait of the Marx Brothers. I was trying to do a caricature of the Marx Brothers, and I had this watercolor and pen and ink technique and all this. I put so much time into doing details to make the style look so good. And I remember my teacher, Graham Booth, giving me grief for it because the pictures didn't look like the Marx Brothers. The line drawings didn't look like them. They were bizarre-looking caricatures. And I was so insensitive to the fact that my drawings didn't look good, that I was trying to cover for it by making the surface of it look nice. And I think the only solution to this is to simply strip away the opportunity to decorate and only work on these. Now I want to go to the next artist.
Yeah, he's covering up mistakes. So he's trying to cover up mistakes with maybe successes he had in the past.
Watercolor is something to work on separately. This is April Solomon. And April Solomon, who just had a show opening in Laguna Beach last night, does work that has such beautiful technique. I want to show the stuff she's got on the internet. Let's take a look at these. This is April Solomon's work. She does these with colored pencils, and I don't know what other media she uses, but you can see April has her technique mastered, and she's got a great compositional and design sense too. But these are enough to where you could make a career doing this kind of stuff and sell your work, but she is not content to stick with that. She has dropped all of the stuff that would impress us, and she did not submit these for us to see. We just took them from off the internet so that we could show this off.
Sorry, April, for the copyright infringement.
Well, we'll see.
We'll ask
I can always
permission
blame
before we
you.
publish it.
Look at how all of the beautiful technique has been removed so that she can work on forms. Now, April, let's get to your forms. You're doing some good things here. My recommendation would be to care more about boxes. Same theme over and over.
Boxes.
Boxes, boxes, boxes. And you are doing it to some degree. You're doing it to enough of a degree to where you're making distinct plane breaks. Although, see right here, I'm not sure how the cross contour would go. I'm guessing that it's going to be something like that. And this line is going to change its direction, isn't it? See, it's in that position there, and by the time it gets over here, we've got a twisted box. And for you to take the time to draw those as separate areas where you're aware of them, and then see that over here, that's going to be more in an angle like that. We're going to see less of the top plane on that one. Those are going to be things that seem slow motion. It's like, gosh, I'll have to spend months on this to really get it, but you spend months on it, and you're already doing that in some of the way your dragons twist. But I think that you would be able to tell a difference on things that you're doing where scales are going around, that this work is going to pay off. Even though it may seem subtle, you'll be able to see it. And also, I think other people will be able to see it. Let's see the other one she did.
Well, before that, I just noticed right here, she labeled it as a hinge.
Yep.
If it's a hinge, why would it be a box?
Yeah.
Simplify it to a cylinder, something that the other form could wrap around.
Yeah.
Right. Again.
Like you've
function.
seen, you've seen other people do it where they turned it into something, even if it was kind of bizarre, but it was at least a hinge.
Yeah.
Or a pivot or a saddle or a.
Yeah. She always knows what
Absolutely.
it is, but. And next one, this is also her.
Yep, that is also her. Fewer round forms and more like what you've done up there on the clavicle and coracoid process and acromion process, and working that out until you're really in control of it, really comfortable with it. So right now you're still struggling with it. And the struggle I don't think is over. I think that you still need to work these things, one form, another form, another form. Tumbling boxes is a great way to think.
Tumbling. You mean just rotating them a little bit more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at that.
What you just showed.
Yeah. And you've got that in the upper right.
And that's her other one.
Yeah, and that one on the right looks very much like what I did. And then over on the left, you've got the organic parts, and it's the part in the middle. It is the part between that form analysis on the right that is a great big macro form analysis, and your organic and contoury one on the left, filling the gaps in and trying to think of each one of those bones as some kind of a stretched out, distorted box will be good exercise. And then the better exercise would be to put that foot in a different position and then try to make those individual bones conform into the bigger
From your imagination.
box. Yeah.
So start by drawing this very general form in a different position.
Yes.
And then within that, put the smaller bones to fit in that bigger geometric box.
Yes.
That's why we simplify that foot that much, because it's so much easier to draw this in a different angle than this in a different angle.
And that sounds like a tough challenge, and it is a tough challenge. But it is the
Very
challenge
tough,
of masterful draftsmanship. That's the 600-year-old thing that the Renaissance artists were inventing how to do, so that you could draw blueprints and side elevation and front elevation of a cathedral or any building, and then you could put the camera here or here or here or here, and they were solving the problems of how you can also do that with the human body and organic forms, and then we've got it. And you are running with organic forms and wonderful mythical creatures, so I encourage you to keep at this, and I congratulate you that you've set aside the beautiful technique to work on this stuff underneath the surface that most people don't see.
Yeah, it takes discipline. I know I'm guilty of that. Before I learned perspective, I was really good at shading.
Yeah, yeah.
I just cover everything up with shading.
I'm not guilty of it anymore.
Do that, actually.
I think everybody is. I think we are going to run with what we feel strong with right now.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to let go of that for something that we can't quite grasp yet.
Yeah. Well, it was the first thing I got good at, and everybody would praise me for it. And so, like, whenever something would turn out bad, I would just shading.
Yeah.
And that was good.
Yeah.
So.
Play the piano. I can play Red River Valley. All right, let's just do that over and over and over and over.
Yeah. So, but be honest with yourself. You know, if you see something wrong, don't just cover it up with something you're good at. Go work, you know, figure out what's wrong with it. Practice it on the side. You don't have to display it for everybody, but you should, because then people can help you fix it. Okay,
Look at
last
this.
one.
Who is this? This is Rob?
Rob Stanfill.
Rob Stanfill.
I'm proud to have my name in his.
I guess, yeah, you do.
This is such a good drawing.
Yeah. Rob Stanfill.
My favorite is this.
It's beautiful.
It's so well done.
It is.
It's such a nice mix between organic and structured. It's
is.
not even really that organic, but
it's organic if you were to blur it, but he's crisped everything up so that there's no blurring in his thinking. He knows every plane. Boy, hard to critique this. This is better than my
there's no
demo.
critique. I don't want to say anything.
We'll volunteer.
Better than I can do. So
We're going to volunteer Rob for to substitute for me for demos next time.
yeah,
I do
look
have
at
one
that.
thing. I think
On
I
this
have one
one?
thing that I can teach him on both of these. Let's see what else we've got with him.
It's just those 2 pages.
It's about spheres.
Oh, okay.
Rob, I want to show you something on, you see this over here on the right, and you've got this core shadow that's in that position, and it's beautiful as a core shadow. But I notice that you're doing this a number of times of the way you're shaping that core shadow, and we might have a lesson from the moon. Let's go back to, let's go back to the previous one, because that was
His
one, yeah.
previous?
And then if you can, over on the right of this, there was a sphere that would be really good for me to demo next to. And can we blow that up bigger on the screen, or will we end up pixelating?
It'll pixelate,
Okay.
but at least you
Yeah.
can draw bigger.
Well, let's see. If I can make a circle, it's going to be close enough.
Okay.
If that had a north to south pole line going through the center of it, the north to south pole line in the center of it would be a straight line. And then over here on the right or the left, the contour, the north to south pole line, would be the shape of the edge. And then anything in between has to be a compromise in between. So the closer it gets to the center, the straighter it will be, and the closer it gets to the edge, the more curved it will be. Sorry for my wobbly line, but you get the idea. When we have the north to south pole line that would go through there, it couldn't be this curved when it's in that position.
Yeah.
It would need to be just a little bit more like what I've got over here.
Yeah.
And that's a subtle call. But I'm pointing it out because you are ready for subtle distinctions like that. Your stuff looks so masterful that that's something that doing some exercises with spheres where you always bisect them both ways. And then you figure out how your curves would be in comparison to those two perpendicular crosshairs is really useful for knowing how much to place that curve, how severe that curve will go.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify. The core shadow is going to follow that equator.
Yeah.
If you have, let's say, this is the North Pole and then the South Pole is behind,
Yeah.
right? And you got the light coming from above. That core shadow is going to wrap around
It has to.
as an ellipse
Yep.
back there around the equator. And so you're going to get a core shadow like that. You're not going to get a core shadow running along this portion.
That's
of it.
right. Actually,
That's-
it can
that's a
only
bad-
happen, that can only happen if you have a small light source. We have a little,
Very small light
Yeah,
source.
very small light source where you put it next to a globe, and then you can get that to happen. But it cannot happen where the light is distant from it.
Yeah.
And it's so nice that you put the north-south pole not on straight up and down, because the sphere can be tumbled any direction.
So if you got a light bulb that's this small
Yeah,
compared to this form, then yeah, the light rays would travel and then they would stop there.
that's right. I mention
But
that because Scott
it's
Robertson
here,
does a
you
demo
know,
where he's got a little light, and you end up seeing these unusual core shadows. But you know, the moon is the best example, right? The moon, when you get what people call a half moon, which is actually a quarter moon, it just chops the moon right in half. Where when you've got a crescent moon, it's almost just a portion of a circle, and that's because that core shadow which on a moon, we call it the Terminator, is following the same formula.
Yeah. It's just you're only seeing the light portion of it.
Yeah.
So this portion will be all dark, and you're seeing only this part of the moon.
Yeah, and I mean even up here, you can.
Pushing
Sorry.
buttons.
Yeah, you can see that would be just the tiniest bit straighter if it was in that position. And again, this is we're
Yeah,
picking
yeah.
at,
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
subtle and masterful things, but for you, it's worth it. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the full view of this. Dude.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to end with this one.
Yeah.
That was the last critique. Thank you for coming. It's
Thank
always
you for
good to have
having
you. Hope you guys enjoy these critiques. And there will be a bunch more coming within the next week or so. So thanks for watching. Check out the full premium version of this video. Much more critiques at proko.com/anatomy. See ya.
Bye.
Hey, have you seen my new app, Skelly, the posable anatomy model for artists? Go to proko.com/Skelly app or click this button to get it on iOS or Android. That's it. Thanks for watching, and thank you for being a premium member. If you're enjoying the course, don't be all selfish. Tell your friends. And if you want to subscribe to the Proko newsletter, go to proko.com/subscribe. Bye-bye.